So there are really 2 points that I want to talk about a little bit. And the 2 points are not necessarily connected, but they're 2 different aspects of the struggle that we're facing. The first, of which I am actually less qualified to talk about, but I think it needs to be mentioned a little bit, are some of the very frightening messianic aspects of this particular struggle, particularly during this time of year. If you remember the Haftarah from the first day of Sukkot, it is taken from chapter 14 of the Navi Zechariah. And Zechariah was one of the very last prophets at the beginning of the Second Temple period. And a lot of Zechariah's prophecies pertain to Mashiach, the apocalyptic struggles before the Mashiach comes, the wars of Gog and Magog, etc. And in chapter 14, he describes the wars of Gog and Magog, and he describes attacks against Jerusalem, and certainly against the land of Israel, in very, very graphic and striking detail. And there is a tradition that this is connected to the holiday of Sukkot, that Sukkot is the time of the wars of Gog and Magog. Now, Gog and Magog, although they are identified as nations, we don't really know who they are. There's all sorts of identifications, ranging from Russia, Ukraine, to Arab nations, to many nations in between. Of course, we have Russia, Ukraine, and the Arab nations, and the like. And Maral adds to the mix a very intriguing idea that the final exile will be a combination of Yishmael, which are the Arab nations, and Persia, which is modern-day Iran. And there will be a collaboration between Paras and Yishmael that will put the Jewish people at very, very great peril until the Mashiach will finally come. And that is connected to Sukkot. So although the Rambam warns us that we really do not know the details of Gog and Magog, we don't know the details of Chavlei Mashiach, the birth pains of Mashiach. We will only understand these things in retrospect, in hindsight. When everything happens, when Mashiach comes, we'll then be able to identify the different stages. But to try to identify those stages as they're happening is really beyond our comprehension. But certainly we have intimations that this is part of the Gog and Magog struggle, especially without getting into details of politics too much, when you consider that this Hamas terrorism was probably sponsored by Iran based on $6 billion that the United States made available to Iran. Again, that's a contested argument, but there is some basis for it. And once again, is that not what the Maharal told us hundreds and hundreds of years ago? That the final pre-Messianic confrontation will be a collaboration, an unhealthy collaboration between Paras, Iran, and Yishmael, the Arab. Remember, Iranians are Muslims, but they're not Arabs. They're considered to be Paras, Persia, and Yishmael are considered to be the Arab nations. So the notion of Gog and Magog is something that is both very frightening and very comforting at the same time. It's very frightening because that does indicate that there may be a long and difficult struggle ahead of us, and it may be filled with dangers and risks, sakanot, and fear. Comforting, however, because it is the birth pains of Mashiach. Note the analogy of birth pains. It's a very, very, very evocative phrase. A woman goes into labor. There's excruciating suffering. Before there was anesthesia, certainly that was the case. But out of that suffering comes life, comes growth, comes something new and beautiful. So too, the Messianic process is like a birth process. There is pain, there is suffering. But out of that suffering will come light and redemption and goodness. Maral points out that there's another metaphor that we use when we describe the Messianic era, and that is the sprouting of a seed. We say in the Amidah, Es Samach David. Samach is a growth. The seed of David will generate. So, if the metaphor of birth connotes the pain that precedes birth, and that connects to the Chavlei Mashiach, the birth pains of Mashiach, the notion of seed has a slightly different connotation, although it's related. Maral says the connotation of a seed is that a seed totally disintegrates into the ground before a plant arises. I plant a seed. If you could watch the seed through an X-ray or whatever it would be, you would actually see a seed disintegrating into the soil and then something coming together. So Maral says, Mashiach cannot come as long as we are consumed with our egotism, our sense of control, our sense that we are in charge of our fate. Man, or the Jewish people, has to reach a state in which they feel helpless, in which they feel their situation is beyond their control, that only God can help them. Of course, we have to do our part. We need, Baruch Hashem, an army, and we're so proud and grateful to all that the army is doing in this difficult time, 100%. But we also have to know that without HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we can't do it. It's the obliteration of our egotism that ultimately is our disintegration that allows the Messianic redemption to come. So the two metaphors are very important. The Biat HaMashiach, the Geula, is described as a birthing process, and is described as the germination of a seed process. One is the pain and the struggle, and the other is the obliteration of ego. Again, I don't want to get too political about this. I just want to point out that one of the things that is surprising everybody, including the Israeli government, is how could there have been such a massive intelligence failure? You know, one of the great strengths of our system is that our guys know what's going on in Gaza and every part of the land, the intelligence all over the world, that Israel is almost never caught by surprise. In fact, it's been said that for every successful terrorist event, the police or the army or the Shin Bet, they manage to frustrate 20. It's like a ratio of 20 to 1. Quite amazing. You know, we hear about a terrorist event, we get very upset. There were 20 others that they managed to nip in the bud. This was a total surprise. And it's very, very strange. I mean, ad kedei kach that I'm even hearing Americans, I think it's unconscionable, critical of Israel, like somehow, I mean, it's kind of perverse. It's somehow Israel's fault that they didn't catch on to this. I mean, talk about blaming the victim. But still, it's very, very surprising. But part of what's going on is that we have to learn sometimes that we're not in charge. And when we get too filled with our own sense of control of the world, God shows us we're not in control. In some ways, that was the lesson of Corona, which, thank God, we're more or less past. And that's also the lesson of Gaza and Hamas, Simchas Torah, 5784. But, as the Maral says, once we get our egos out of the way, then we're ready for Geula, then we're ready for Mashiach. So, as I say, as I contemplate the Messianic picture, and again, this is not anything that I can say I have any firm grasp on, really none of us have, except maybe the greatest Kabbalists, I'm filled with both fear and trepidation, but also with opportunity and hope, because these are the signs of Biat HaMashiach. These are the signs of Chavlei Mashiach. These are the signs of GoguMagog. And indeed, even the time of year fits the description in the Navi Zechariah. So there is hope. There is a reason to be hopeful. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we should see the Yeshuat Hashem very, very soon.